Hi, welcome to another episode of My Next Property. My name's Steve Ash. I'm the founder of Property Strats. I've built an $18 million property portfolio. I'm helping everyday Australians do the same. So we're coming into the second episode of our series on the first home buyers grant and the impact on the property market. So this particular time, we're going to cover Victoria and Melbourne in general here. So obviously there's a lot of talk from myself on the pods. We've been very active investors in Melbourne. We see this as a real value play. And the Melbourne market's obviously been in the doldrums for a while. Having said that, in the last year, we've seen sort of green shoots and certain signs of life. And we're definitely seeing prices in a number of areas doing quite well. And so when you put these changes into the mix, this will be more good news for property prices in Victoria, but Melbourne in general. So also when we look at these sort of bands, it's not just Melbourne, like the likes of Geelong particularly will do well, and we can unpack that a little bit. And we're going to go into Geelong in an episode coming up. But first up, let's define what this is. So the first home buyers grant. So this came into effect on the 1st of October. And really the idea is just to make it easier for first home buyers to get onto the housing ladder. And so with this, there's various stipulations state by state. Episode 1, we covered Queensland and Brisbane. Now, obviously looking at Victoria, the actual cap where buyers don't have to pay LMI is up to 950K in Melbourne now. And there's also no stamp duty up to certain amounts as well. So again, to summarise, 5% up to 950,000. If we look at those stamp duty bands as well, so first home buyers buying in Melbourne or Victoria at the moment don't have to pay any stamp duty up to 600,000. There's a concessional band between 600 and 750,000, and then between 750 or 751, if you will, all the way up to sort of 950. That's when first home buyers will have to pay full stamp duty here. So what does that sort of translate to in real terms? So let's just say a first home buyer was going out to buy a property in the various areas, and we know that there's quite a few areas where this can be done at the moment. At 600,000, what that would mean is there's no LMI, so lender's mortgage insurance to pay on this. There's no stamp duty to pay. So the closing cost for that particular property would be just $31,200. So if you think about that, that's going to be a lot of demand for people to get on the housing ladder at that particular price point. Not much money to go in at all to it, and leverage really working in their favour. And what we're seeing on the ground is a lot of activity in these price boundaries. But before we go into that and the suburbs where we can actually have a look at where there might be opportunity for investors, let's have a look at the other bands. And so the next band we've got is between $600,001 up to $750,000. So here there is a kind of a stamp duty liability here, but no LMI. So if we were, say, in this band, say purchasing at, say, $740,000, with the liability here or the deposit, like to actually close the deal, would be $42,000. That includes, reduced stamp duty, 5% deposit, and closing costs. So still the money goes a long way from there, and then upwards of $750,000. If we just then went in and bought a property at, say, $800,000, closing costs then would be $84,500. So it's quite interesting when we look at Victoria. It's almost like that's actually quite a lot more than the other two categories. People will still use that, of course, but as you can see, the bang for buck goes a lot further up to that during that concessional amount before you actually have to start paying full stamp duty. And we do know that stamp duty in Victoria is the most expensive of any state as well. So that's setting the scene there. So what we're seeing on the ground is ever since this was announced, so going back into September, we started seeing a lot more interest from first home buyers and investors alike in various suburbs. And since we've now hit October, the areas that we're starting to look at are doing really well. So I've put out some content on the social media channel where some of the open homes that we've been to in Berwick have had multiple, but I think it was 50 groups. We had a couple of opens we went to, Cranbourne North, Cranbourne West, getting similar sort of numbers, Frankston doing very well as well. But if we go and have a look from an investor point of view and we go through these boundaries and what sort of assets and what type of suburbs and what we can look at and what we can get to. So if we're looking, say, 600,000, clearly, as I've talked about many times, there's a lot of value in units. And some of the feedback that we get, or a lot of feedback that we get from agents on our ground, people that we work with a lot, is there's a lot of interest from first home buyers in that cheaper category. So units in Melbourne are amongst the cheapest properties in Australia. When you think about Melbourne was most livable city for a long time. We could look at properties in Frankston, pretty cheap. In Carlton, properties there, very cheap units, 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, going at very reasonable prices. Going out to Dandenong, shout out to one of the team members, Theo. We're going to do an episode on this where some of the best value in Australia sort of in Dandenong units, or crack dens as he likes to call them. But we should see all of these, well, maybe not the crack dens, but certainly the areas where where there's desirable, where people want to live, these areas doing very well. And so that's around about the $600,000 mark for units. But if we the good thing about Melbourne is there's a lot of opportunity within villas, townhouses, but also houses where you can still get on the market. Where in other cities you've seen houses, get a long way away from sort of unit prices. Like that's not so much the case in Melbourne. So while it's getting harder and harder to find in that sort of bracket where you don't have to pay stamp duty to 600,000, there are still opportunities out there. So I'm thinking the likes of Werribee, for example, where we picked up a deal this week. It's sort of on 420 square meters of land. It was a 3-bed, 2-bathroom, 2-car garage quite close to the Westfield. And we purchased that at 550. That's not going to be in the fires for much longer. There's other sort of spots in, say, Truganina. There's many bets in Truganina, but you can get there. The other one that I'm thinking of quite heavily is Melton as well. And we've seen prices in Melton do very well. So Melton, we're going to do an episode on Melton at some point. So Melton's about 40 k's northwest of CBD. There's a number of suburbs in there. You can still get houses on pretty decent plots. About 6 months ago, you're looking low fives. Now you're looking high fives, even touching past that 6. So good suburbs in Melton. You're looking at Kurrajong and Harkness. Really, really good value. And we'll see those markets run quite hot, I think, with first-time buyers wanting to get in and wanting to get some houses in that particular mark. So if we look at kind of the next kind of boundary, if you will, sort of like that sort of $601 up to sort of $750, what we see is that almost like by, say, 50 grand increments, you can actually get into some better sort of suburbs, if you will. Done an episode on Point Cook. So that really lower end of the market in Point Cook. So where you're getting, say, a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2-car garage on, say, sort of 350 square meters of land. Potentially, you were picking that up at 650 to 680 about 6 months ago. That's now 700 to 720. That asset's going to perform pretty well. And that's what we're seeing at the opens. It was a very lukewarm market a few months ago, but now we're getting 18 to 20 groups through there. So those type of properties will do pretty well. Other areas which are doing well in this price bracket, Cranbourne, it's about 26 k's north of the CBD. It's done incredibly well. Likes of Hampton Park in the southeast is performing pretty good as well. Frankston North, a lower type social suburb, but it's changing a lot. There's a bit of opportunity in this price bracket still. Cranbourne's an area we love. It's done very well, but there's definite opportunity still up to that 740 where we're going to see first home buyers come in for investors, and that kind of like those markets will be gone pretty quickly. So if we look at that higher boundary, you go all the way up to 950. I mean, there's a number of markets. Like in the first episode in Brisbane, when we covered up to 1 million, there's only a few markets we can really talk about. But in Melbourne, there's a number of markets, and we're certainly seeing the interest across those. I touched on Berwick. Berwick's a really good suburb in the southeast, and we're seeing a lot of interest with the opens there. But then obviously Frankston's another one. So Frankston has been a very popular suburb with first-time buyers, and it's also been a very popular suburb with investors. So it's in the southeast, it's Bayside, it's very close to some very premium suburbs like Frankston South and Mount Eliza, etc. in the Mornington Peninsula. But again, picking up a house with decent land content still, even though we've seen prices rise 100, 150 grand, and first-time buyers will go to these areas basically because you've got lifestyle, you've got shopping, you've got good facilities, amenities, good transports into the city. So with this grant coming in place, we're seeing Frankston having I wouldn't say it's a second win because it hasn't really stopped since earlier in the year, but these areas doing very well. Really, there's a number of opportunities in Melbourne with this because the price point's low. And definitely with the interest that we're seeing in these suburbs, we'll continue to see a good price increase over the next years or so. So if we couple this with interest rates coming down, interstate migration getting higher into Melbourne, if you think about the cycles or property cycles, Melbourne being at the bottom of the cycle, what happened with Brisbane really was Brisbane was cheap. Brisbane didn't move in 2019 for 10 years or so. And as part of the cycle, people in Sydney, people in Melbourne kind of looked at the Sunshine State and saw affordability up there. So you could get properties on decent land content at 600, 700,000 back then. You could get rents at pretty good rates. And now that situation's flipping really. And you're looking at Melbourne is in reverse where you can rent 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom homes for like 500 or 550 and you can get onto the market. But if you now couple this with the policy changes that's been made, we should see it'll be kind of lighter fuel for the market, if you will, over in the short to medium term. So if we're trying to build a property portfolio and we want to sort of get that, get that equity extraction time frame, then targeting these sort of bands that I've talked about will help you sort of fast track that. So we're helping a lot of people getting into these sort of markets at the moment. One market I touched on as well is Geelong, but we could keep going and going because everywhere's quite cheap in Melbourne. I hope this has helped a lot. So demystifying what this is and how this is actually going to impact the Melbourne market a little bit. The next one we're going to cover is Sydney. So I look forward to talking to you on that episode. Thank you for listening.